We'll talk about shift left. I spent just a few minutes explaining that in the first podcast, but we're going to spend some time on talking about that. Its importance, the ability to build a software development delivery infrastructure that gives you the opportunity to find problems and to resolve those problems as quick as possible. Test data management, huge opportunity and significant task, but there are technologies that can help you build out that test data management system for your organization, for your group, so to make the standing up and the provisioning data easier, but more importantly, faster. We talked about the importance of collaboration. We spend way too much time in meetings and preparing status reports. And so we need technologies, tools in managing that process, that value stream, but also in providing information to all the stakeholders who are involved in that process and in providing that information real time. So good collaborative systems are a key characteristic of the modern software delivery environment. Security has to be built into the process. Can't express that enough. We've got to make sure that the security process in place today and those that we want to implement tomorrow are a part of that software delivery process. And there's a lot of work that can be done with regard to automating the activities within that process to ensure a secure code base and a secure delivery of those services. And then we talked about measurement and monitoring and how critical they are to the software delivery environment, especially in an environment where you want to promote continuous learning, continuous feedback. Without those metrics, very difficult to implement changes for the good. Measurement is critical, and there are key metrics that need to be captured during the process. One of the things that I love about some of the things that we're doing at Compuware is we're building that metrics capture into the tooling itself so that developers are not having to enter that information or project managers are not having to capture that information, but that work that's being executed is actually tracked by the technology and then reported as such. And we'll spend some time talking about that as well. So let me stop sharing this particular slide. And at this point in time, we're going to open it up to questions. There's some other things. Well, let me make you aware of some things. For you to answer questions, you need to go to the View menu option within the WebEx app. Go to Show Panels, and then there's a Q&A menu option that will allow you to ask your questions. You can ask them there. Hopefully, I'll see them, and we'll be able to respond to them. If there are questions that I won't be able to answer, one of the things that I've learned over time is that one of the beauty aspects of age and maturity is that you learn very quickly, or you learn that you don't know the answers to everything. And so if there are questions I won't be able to answer, then if you will email me directly, then I'll make sure that we get those questions answered and get that information back to you as quick as possible. So let me see if there's anything else I need to do from a preview standpoint. If not, then we'll move forward. So at this point in time, I already see questions coming in. So let me jump on some of those. So the first question comes from Kim, and it says that there are distributed development teams in my company that currently use Agile, but we don't use it for the mainframe. Can the same tools be used by other teams, I'm assuming the mainframe teams, to be shared and repurposed for mainframe development? Great question, Kim, and absolutely they can. I think that's one of the biggest transitions that we are seeing in the industry today, and there are already great examples of organizations that are already beginning to leverage technologies they've already made significant investments in, from a resource standpoint, from an educational standpoint, from an implementation standpoint. And these tools have been providing good support and providing additional efficiencies and adding to increased speed in non-mainframe targeted software for some time now. Tools like Jenkins and Sonar and others are vital to the automation of the build process and of the testing process and of the deployment process. And yes, the answer to that question is they absolutely can be used by mainframe developers today. That was one of the reasons that I joined Compuware, its ability to provide our mainframe development services, capabilities to mainframe developers, mainframe testers, and to leverage the investments that they had made. So if you're looking to automate the build process, automate the testing process, automate the deployment process, you can absolutely use tools like Jenkins to orchestrate that work. And the savings are significant. Think about the potential impact on a work product or software delivery lifecycle, where when developers make changes to code and they apply those changes to their SCM, the ability to automatically initiate a compile and a link edit build for that code, and not only a build of that code, but also subsequent unit testing, the ability to initiate test every time a change is made to that code. That has tremendous benefit, not only from a velocity or speed perspective, but from a quality perspective. Think about that. I'm making a change to a code, I test those changes, it works. Somebody else has asked to make changes to that code 6 weeks, 6 months later. The ability to execute predefined test case scenarios, unit test, integration test, functional test, the ability to execute those automatically anytime a change is applied to that code base is going to make a significant difference with regard to the quality of what's produced, because you're helping to prevent corruption to the base, and so that's always good. So the answer to the question is absolutely. Mainframe development teams can start to leverage the same automation tools that non-mainframe developers have been using. So let's see. Next question. Next question comes from Todd. And the question is, you've listed, I talked about several components in the modern platform. Can you recommend a starting point? Which components should be implemented first? Good question, Todd. It's a classic answer to that is it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the starting point for where that organization is in their transformational journey. For most, not all, but for most clients that I work with who are looking to get better at developing code, maintaining code on the mainframe, it starts with the SCM and having a source control management system that is in alignment with agile processes. And so that's, to me, that's a typical starting point. Along with that, I think, is the IDE. And so in a lot of cases, a lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past, we begin with those two things. If we can build a source control, an SCM, that provides the capabilities that align well with agile methods, then that's a great starting point. One of the problems I see in mainframe development is we're very dependent upon SCMs that have been in the marketplace for many years, and those SCMs were built to support the traditional waterfall methods. And so a lot of the capabilities, things like parallel development support, the ability to look at code and provide developers the information they need to merge that code is critical. The ability to support continuous integration, the ability to add to feature branches and release branches and manage that merge process is absolutely critical in a modern software development environment. So the SCM is a logical starting point. The IDE is a close second, and because that has the potential to improve productivity tremendously. also has business advantages. And I talked about this in the podcast last week. The ability to, one of the great reasons to start to look at modernizing that IDE is to make it easier and certainly faster to bring in new resources that may not have learned their programming skills leveraging a 3270 TSO ISPF environment, as much as I love that environment. Programmers today coming out of university and for the last few years typically have learned to their craft on graphical type environments, Eclipse and other type of environments. And so to be able to provide an environment that they are comfortable with, that they are familiar with, has tremendous business benefits in getting them up to speed faster. The other thing that I believe in and I think is important with a modern graphical environment is its ability to create an infrastructure to where developers can move from platform to platform. We'll talk about automation in a subsequent episode, but if you think about automation and the IDE, the ability to have developers focused on coding tasks without concern, maybe too strong a word, but without deep understanding of their target deployment platform has incredible benefits for the organization. Easier to move resources from team to team, task to task. Now again, easier said than done. But again, having a modern IDE that is leveraged across all your target platforms that can be used regardless of language or technology has a huge business impact. Your ability to share resources is going to have a significant impact on your cost if your development resources can transition from platform to platform. A common look and feel, regardless of what platform target you're shooting at or building for, is incredibly valuable. So let me go down to the next question. Let's see. I think this is from Tim. Tim, is the process easier when you're running COBOL version 6 versus, say, COBOL 4? Well, good question. It depends again on a few things. If you're building a development environment, the impact is negligible depending upon COBOL version. If I'm looking to modernize my processes for how I deliver software, and I'm looking to modernize the technology used to edit code, to test code, to deploy code, then the versioning is not that big a difference. But I tell you where I believe this has a big impact. If you're an organization that's moving or transitioning from 4 or 5 to 6, your need for testing is obviously going to be critical. Having an environment that can facilitate faster testing is going to help you in that migration effort. And so a modernized software delivery environment has significant benefits, regardless of the COBOL version, but I see it as a nice prerequisite and a nice to have with regards to a migration to a COBOL 6. Next question. This comes from Claire. We are currently developing in a green screen environment. What does the time frame look like for implementing a graphical IDE? Not long at all, Claire. I mean, we've gone in with customers and made that change quickly. And so the installation and implementation, configuration of the environment, relatively easy, relatively fast. There's some components that have to be installed on the mainframe if they're not already there. But getting the software onto someone's desk is a relatively easy process. And again, I don't want this to turn into a sales situation, but at Compuware, we've made that process very easy because we can capture existing configuration details from a project standpoint, from a group standpoint, and we can apply those to additional users as we add them or add the technology to their toolbox. So it's a relatively easy transition. Now, what's more difficult is the cultural changes and getting beyond a clinging to that software or that technology that most of us with the same color hair as mine hold close to. You know, if you've been doing significant mainframe application development for several years, there's a desire to cling. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but a desire to leverage those tools that, quite honestly, have worked very well for you. One of the things that I've talked to a lot of customers. One of the things you'll never hear me do is to bash that technology or even the processes that we've leveraged for many years on the mainframe side. They have served us very well, and it's evidenced through the fact that a lot of that code is still running after 30 years, some even longer. And so we've got the problem is not the quality of what can be produced using that technology. The problem is the speed at which we can produce it. In today's market, in today's atmosphere, speed is critical. I think it's the driving force behind a lot of the work that I see going on with modernization efforts. We certainly cannot lose sight of the quality, especially for applications code targeted to the mainframe. It is the critical business processes typically for an organization. So it has to work. There are no failure options. It has to work. And so the quality of what we produce has to be built into that process. And we've just got to get faster. And these technologies, these new capabilities, I believe, give us the best opportunity to do that. The speed at which we can implement those technologies will depend a lot upon the organization that you're working for, a lot on the management that is responsible for its implementation, and a lot on those people who are doing this work and their willingness to look at other options with regard to software development. It's not an issue for most. I think if you truly love software development, you truly love building code, then you want to leverage the best that's what's available to you. And so I don't think it's as big an issue as some. Getting started is the hard part. And going back to Claire's question, it doesn't take a long time to get started with a lot of these technologies. It can be very quick. Okay, next question. This comes from Tony. In the companies that you've worked with, what have been the biggest obstacles to modernizing software delivery? Well, that's actually a great transition from where we just come. Tony, it's always the fear of change. Culturally, getting people to move from what they're very comfortable with to tools that they may not be comfortable with can be a challenging thing. So, in my experience, it's always been overcoming the fear of change. One of the big problems that I see in a lot of organizations, especially, is this transition from traditional waterfall methods to agile methods. I'm an agile guy, and I used to be, nobody was a bigger supporter of waterfall than I was, because I had great experience and great success with waterfall techniques. But being able to look at agile as a way to minimize the amount of rework, I've seen this in too many projects, was the eye-opening event for me. Looking at that total cycle time reduction based on agile processes was significant, and so I'm a full-fledged supporter of that. But it's culture change, getting people to change the way they think about software development and being able to transition. I like to use the word evolve, how to evolve away from processes, again, that may have served them well. Is typically the hardest question or hardest thing to overcome. Let me see, looking at the next questions. Again, comes from Todd. He writes, these changes involve software accesses to boxes, assume computing devices, data sharing. Are there common pitfalls involving security that we should avoid? Now, security has to be front and center in the work that we do, and there are ways to do that. Any technologies that you're leveraging should be able to utilize the existing security capabilities that you have in place from an access standpoint. If you're developing code that requires access to your host or to your mainframe or access to your data stores or to whatever on that platform, then it should take advantage of the security capabilities that are already in place there, and any technology that doesn't support that, I'd walk away from. But there are other security questions. More and more people are concerned about securing the code and making sure that the code we write has no vulnerabilities. It's not as big a problem on the mainframe, but it is a problem. And so there are technologies in the marketplace today to actually assess your code to determine if there are potential vulnerabilities in that code. One that comes to my mind that I've seen work very well is with Sonar. In Sonar, there's a database of rules, and it typically on the mainframe and specifically with COBOL is looking for bad coding practices. So finding, those bad coding practices is an incredible benefit for the developer, for the organization. But inside Sonar, there are also some rules out of the box that will look for code that potentially has security implications. And so tools like that, I think, are critical, and they have to be part of your process. One of the things that we do that I think is very smart is we set up quality gates when we, after code has been deployed or promoted, then there's a check on that code for, as I stated earlier, the quality of that code from a coding practice perspective. But then we also leverage rules that are out of the box from Sonar, but rules that we have applied to Sonar to ensure that the code that we're writing is as secure as it can be. So leveraging existing security technologies for access, and then leveraging tools to ensure that your code is secure as possible, all are possible and should be a part of your software development process, and it should be automated. A lot of that things I just talked about should be automated tasks within your pipeline. So we'll actually talk more about that in a future episode. It's an important topic. Okay, let me look for the next question. Looks like a question from Robert. In your experience, how do experienced developers that are used to TSO, ISPF react to a modern IDE? Good question, Robert. I'll give you my own experience. I remember as a good assembler COBOL programmer, I had set up an environmental world under TSO and ISPF of macros and Rex files, actually some C-lists that I had developed to help me in the work that I'd done, and I felt like I was very proficient with it. And there were good tools. And so when the first graphical IDE that I looked at and started to use, I thought, man, there's no way I can be as productive in this environment as I was in my green screen environment. But I was one of those guys that had been doing it for a long, long time. I was very comfortable with it. I didn't want to change. I knew what I was doing in that environment. Moving to a graphical environment was a little more difficult because of the differences, of the nuances, and because I didn't have experience with it. I quickly found that I was actually more productive, and the reason was, I didn't type any faster. A lot of the work that I didn't perform any faster. But what I found, and I think what most people find, is that with the same screen real estate, whether you've got one monitor or two monitors or three monitors on your desk, with the same screen real estate, I can do more in a graphical environment because I'm not moving in and out of different tool features that are typical of a 3270 environment that I have available to me in a graphical environment. Think about all that you can do that in a graphical environment. And that aligns very well with, if you think about the work of a programmer and what they're doing, there's typically several tasks several balls that they're juggling at the same time. There's the coding factor. There is the monitoring factor of jobs or work that you've executed that you're reviewing. There is the manipulation of test data, and there's the review of test data. And typically, these activities are occurring somewhat simultaneously. In a traditional 3270 world, I'm having to go into that or a particular feature, a function, and back out, go to something else. And so just the sheer time required to move in and out of that type of environment will slow you down. Where a graphical environment, moving from capability to capability, work item to work item, is much easier, much faster. We did some work. I think I told you guys last week that I worked at IBM for several years. And we actually did some testing to determine the actual productivity benefits or non-benefits, depending upon the outcome of the test. And we were amazed. We took, I don't remember exactly the number, but I think it was roughly 30 developers. And a third of them were brand new developers, a third of them less than 5 years experience, and then the third were people more like myself who had spent several years in a 3270 environment. We gave them, and again, somebody who has worked with me may correct me on this, but I think it was 100 tasks, or right at 100 tasks to go execute. And they were classical tasks, everyday tasks that the developer would execute in the fulfillment of their duties. And after running those tasks on the 3270 environment, and we had them run those exact same tasks on the graphical environment, and the graphical environment won in all three categories. And so just because of your ability to transition from work item much faster. So I believe it is faster. I think that it's hard. I think you have to begin with people who are open to change, who embrace change, and there will be people in your organization that do that. Leverage the technology with those folks. Use those folks in the initial pilot or proof of concept or initial rollout team. Leverage those people to leverage the technology, and they will begin to internally sell the benefits and the advantages of working in a graphical environment. That said, the truth is you're going to have some folks that are just unwilling to change. And so again, this will vary from organization to organization, person to person, leader to leader. I'm not much into spending time working with the people who are just unwilling to change. I'd rather spend my time on folks who are open to that change and getting them successful in the use of those products. At some point in time, if Joe is delivering faster than Jim, Jim will make that change if he wants to stay at pace. But again, the more important reason is for me are business drivers. As we bring people in to support these applications that are going to be with us for a while, as we bring new people, as we bring other people in who may not have years of experience in TSO, an ISPF environment, as we bring more people in who are more comfortable in a graphical environment, the organization's ability to get them productive sooner is greatly enhanced with the introduction with the graphical modern IDE. So, I think that has to be your driver. That has to be your focus. Okay, but thank you for that question. Good question. Let me see if I've got some other questions. I got one. This is from Tim. It says, how much can the learning curve be reduced for younger developers with no COBOL experience? Actually, a great question. I've got experience after experience with folks who are good programmers being brought into the organization. Maybe they were initially signed to a Java project or some other non-mainframe related project, but as changes occur in the organization and resource needs grow, the desire to bring those resources into support or the modification of an existing mainframe piece of code or application, the ability to leverage those resources is a huge business advantage. And so the question is, what's the learning curve for bringing those younger developers with no COBOL experience? It's always going to depend on the capabilities of the developer. But here's what I've seen. You take older developers like myself and try to transition them from linear-based software development with linear-based languages like COBOL or C, assembler, and to try to transition those people with that type of experience to an object-oriented type language like Java or C++, the transition can be very difficult. I've seen people make that jump. Now, in the same vein, people who have experience in the object-oriented languages and are asked to transition to support of a more linear language, the transition is much easier. Now, there's still some work to be done. I've had the belief for a long time that good programmers can make that transition regardless easily because they care about what they do, they care about their craft, and they can make that transition. But I don't want to say younger, but less experienced developers coming in being asked to support COBOL applications is not as big a leap as asking someone like me to go and support Java or more object-oriented language projects. And so I think that it's easier. Now, the other thing that makes it easier goes back to earlier discussions we had. If we can provide those resources with an infrastructure, a software delivery system, my favorite word, and we'll talk more about that later, then if we can provide the same type of infrastructure that they've got some familiarity with and comfort with, again, obviously it makes that transition a lot easier. So I think it's always tough to move from language to language, but I certainly think it's easier to move from an object-oriented background to a linear programming project. And I also believe that if we can provide an infrastructure that looks very similar, regardless of target, regardless of technology, then that transition becomes very easy and relatively easy at a lower cost and higher value for the business. Okay, let me see if there are other questions. I think we might have them all at this point in time. So let's wrap up. We're a little early, but that's okay. I appreciate very much you joining us today. I think this is going to be fun. One of the things that you'll get from me is that, smart enough to know that I don't know everything. And so I'll be honest with you regarding those questions that I get that maybe I can't answer. But I have been doing this for a long, long time, and I certainly have a love for it. And we'll have good discussions. There will be some questions that I'm sure we get that we'll talk about on the live session, and probably we'll use that in future podcasts as topics to dig down into. But again, I appreciate your time here. I want to talk a little bit about next week's podcast. It'll be dropped, I think, on Monday. I spent some time talking about the software delivery platform. You'll hear me refer to it as a software delivery system. And we'll talk about the architecture that typically comprises that platform. We'll talk about some of the technologies that are used to support a modern software delivery environment. And the best part of that particular podcast is I was able, or our marketing folks were able to get our executive VP in charge of our labs, Dave Rizzo, to join me on the podcast. And he's going to talk about what we've done at Compuware with regard to our software delivery platform. It's an amazing story. Another one, again, Dave's one of the first guys that I interviewed when I came to Compuware that I talked to, and was amazed at what these guys are doing. It's not perfect. It's not, and Dave will tell you, we're not at 100% automation yet, but gosh, we're getting darn close. And the things that he's doing is amazing. So he's going to talk a little bit about the architecture that we leverage in the support of our applications and products. I'll talk a little bit about from my experience, but I'm looking forward to it. Dave's such a great guy, such a good, honest person, and I hope you'll enjoy spending some time with him. So let me make sure that I've got all the things done on my checklist complete. I see some other people out there. Tony, good to see you. Glad to have you. Going to get you on here as well, so that would be great. Appreciate you sending the note. I think that's it. We've talked about the next podcast. So at this point in time, I don't see any other questions. So we will shut it down. If you've got questions or you've got concerns, you can get more information about the podcast and this live Q&A by going to compuware.com/goodcoding. Good Coding. We'll have information about these events there. Also in Twitter, we've got a good coding hashtag that we've created. So hopefully you'll be able to look at events and see articles, tweets about some of the things that we're doing. So I hope you will join us next week. I hope you'll download the podcast. I hope that they're interesting, and I would love to get your feedback. If there are topics, if there are things that you'd like me to do differently, if I can, I'll be happy to look at that. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you do. Customers, thank you very much. We appreciate you. And we'll sign off and take care, everyone, and good coding. See you guys.